Welcome to Her Story, where motherhood is real, raw, and unfiltered.
A powerful collaboration between Birth by Us and the Birth Squad. This is a space where mothers come together to share their truths.
From pregnancy to postpartum, through triumphs and challenges, these are the stories that connect us all.
Because every mother has a story, and we're here to listen. This is Her Story. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Her Story, a collaboration series by Birth by Us and the Birth Squad. Today, we have a very special guest, Raedell. Welcome to the podcast. We want to start by asking you to introduce yourself and to tell us a little bit about who you are.
So, in no particular order, I am a sister, daughter, wife, and mom. Family is important, so I feel like those aspects of, how I show up in relationships matter to me. I am an educator. I have been a classroom teacher, and now I am a professor, and I mostly work with folks who want to become teachers, so in teacher education. I also have a coaching and consulting business, and I call myself a liberation doula. And that came along before I gave birth, but now that I have given birth, it feels extra relevant. The journey to liberation, most folks do not realize, requires a lot of work, a lot of hurt and pain and discomfort. And most people actually are not as willing to go through it as they think that they are. So I like to put that out there, and people are like, ooh, what does that mean? Let's see, what else? I said I'm a mom, but I just want to call that out again because I feel like that's kind of my newest kind of title, and it means so much, and it's also changing so much as my son grows and changes as well. I feel like I'm a global citizen because I live all over the world, which we will get into, I'm sure, as I tell a bit more of my pregnancy journey and story. But I think that's important to mention too. And yeah, I feel like that's a good introduction to me.
Thank you so much for telling us a little bit about yourself. I think you mentioned this a little bit in your introduction, but I would love to get a sense of what was your pathway towards motherhood, essentially.
My pathway towards motherhood. I feel like I always wanted to be a mom. I guess I imagined that like I would grow up and I would go to college, I would graduate, I would meet somebody, fall in love, we get married and have a baby. And I mean, that's kind of what happened, but it took a little longer than I anticipated it would. So I imagine, by the time I was like 25, like all of those things would be happening. But I didn't actually get married until I was 33. And then I had my son when I was 37. So I would say there was a lot of wishing and hoping and praying and wondering when and why was it taking so long. And then once I finally was married, it wasn't super easy to conceive. It took us a little while. And so I think there was a lot of what it felt like in my human self, a lot of waiting. But I feel like spiritually there's probably some things around timing that needed to be worked out, and everything has happened the way it's supposed to.
So Raedell, can you tell us, what does your family structure look like or your support system? And then how did it influence your pregnancy and your birth experience?
Yeah, so my immediate family now is my husband and my brother-in-law who also lives with us. And so we live in Ghana, and that's where we spend most of our time. And so that's where I am now. And so that's my immediate support system. But I gave birth in the US, and my husband was not able to be there. So I also have a really important community in the Seattle area, which is where I lived before I moved to Ghana and where I went back to give birth. And when I tell you the people that are part of my community in Seattle that have just stepped up, it's been amazing. Like when I told friends that we wanted me to give birth in the States, and we're probably thinking Seattle. There were two friends in particular that immediately were like, "You're staying with me. You're staying with us. We're going to support you. We're going to help take care of you." And I felt emotional and I felt grateful, but I had no idea how much I was going to need them and would need to depend on them. And so the just unconditional love and support that my community in Seattle has poured out to me, it's beyond words, not just to me, but to my whole family. And they're my people. They have shown up. They've done everything. from like being there during my hospital stay, a NICU stay, post NICU, when we ended up having to stay in the States much longer, my son and I much longer than we anticipated. People offering housing, food, everything, transportation that we needed that was so unexpected because of how my son ended up being born.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the community support you're mentioning is so crucial. And I'm like just so grateful that you were able to have that because we know not everybody can have that, unfortunately. So you mentioned a couple things, with the NICU stay and how that was not obviously what you had planned and giving birth away from your partner. What would you say are like some other unexpected challenges, or maybe even like on the positive side? What are the most memorable moments that happened through your pregnancy, birth, and we can also bring in postpartum to that question.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand, the challenges and the unexpected positive things that happen. Like, as I was saying, I don't think I would have realized just how much my community is and has been there for me if I hadn't gone through these challenges. And I think it's brought me closer to the people that are in my community and has shown me like who's really there to show up and who, just kind of there for the moment. So my son ended up being born 10 weeks early. Quick little context. We were in Ghana and I had not felt well most of my pregnancy, and the doctors were just didn't really say anything. They were kind of like, one doctor said, like, I mentioned that like I couldn't eat and I was losing weight, and one doctor literally told me, because you're overweight, like you don't need to worry about anything. But I did not feel well my entire pregnancy. The second trimester came along and I did not get that, oh, I feel good feeling. I just felt sick the whole time. So we were like, okay, going back to the US earlier than anticipated. When I got back to the US, started seeing a midwife, and the midwife also was kind of like, things look like they're fine. And then I saw another midwife and they started noticing some things in my blood and urine. And they were like, these are kind of signs of pre-eclampsia, but we're not totally sure. We want to keep testing you. And so I kept getting tested and they were like, this is definitely pre-eclampsia. And they sent me to a maternal fetal medicine specialist. And then that day she was like, yeah, you need to be hospitalized. And I was like, wait, what's happening? And so from there, I went to the hospital. I was there 5 days and then I had to give birth my son 10 weeks early, and he came out just over 2.5 pounds. And so that journey in and of itself was a thing, right? And so those things were challenges, having to leave my husband, having to come to the States. Like I said, I had community, so I wasn't on my own, but also like I was kind of on my own. I didn't have my husband. The rest of my family also was not there. I ended up being diagnosed with COVID the day that I had to go into labor as well. And so people were like not allowed in the delivery room. So in so many ways, it was just like me. And so there were a lot of challenges that came with that, but the positivity I feel like that came out of it is I had to learn how to show up for someone else and find myself. Anxiety wanted to take over, frustration, sadness wanted to take over. And I had to just be like in the moment, like, I'm not living this for me. Like, I need to be cool, calm, and okay in this moment for my son. And that in a lot of ways has shown me that I can overcome anxiety in ways that I didn't realize before, right? That anxiety doesn't have to control me all the time, that if I have a purpose that's bigger than the anxiety, then I can manage it better. And so I still get anxious at times, but I recognize my strength. So I think that's a positivity that came out of it. And then, so my son was born. He was in the NICU. I couldn't see him for the first 10 days because I had COVID. And then I had like a whole bunch of joint pain surrounding my pregnancy as well. And so, and all the postpartum stuff that's happening, baby's in the NICU. I also have COVID, and now I'm having joint pain. So I finally get to see a doctor, and we do some tests, and I get diagnosed with lupus. And so I was like, yes, here we go, a whole nother challenge on top of all these other challenges. And again, there were moments where I broke down and I was like, I literally cannot do this, God. Like, I can't do this. Like, I cannot do this. And so what are you trying to show me? Like, what are you trying to show me? What are you trying to teach me? What am I supposed to do? And I literally just like felt spirit being like, you just go sit down somewhere. You need to stop. You don't need to be thinking about work all the time. You don't need to be hustling. You don't need to be doing all of these things. Like, just go sit down somewhere and trust that I'm going to take care of you. And I literally had to because my body was in pain. I was emotionally broken. Again, I was without my husband, without my partner. And so I literally had to just like in moments just sit down. And so I've learned a lot how to like find peace in the midst of all of this challenge when it just seems like everything is coming at you. Like, how do I just find and still have peace in the midst of all of that? And a lot of that too has taught me how to depend on people who are dependable. And so I've had to be like, you know what, in this moment, I can't feed myself. I need somebody to bring me food. In this moment, I really need a hug. Can somebody just come sit with me and hold me? You know, in this moment, I need this. Like, I don't have to be, I can't be strong all the time, or that my strength is in accepting that I'm weak in this moment and I need some help. I need some support. And so I think that like my whole kind of like just emotional foundation has like shifted and grown because of those challenges that I've gone through. And again, understanding and appreciating the support of community and what it really means to like have your people, to know that, to learn that has come through adversity, unfortunately. But I also feel like now, like I know who my people are. I know so much more who I am, and how I need to and can show up in the world.
Wow, what an extraordinary story. What huge challenge that you had to go through, but what an amazing also story of resilience. So thank you so much for sharing that. And the fact that you can still smile about that is amazing. You touched on it briefly, you know, and all the circumstances kind of surrounding it, but can you share with us your birth experience?
Yeah, so I will never ever forget this day. I'm going to the maternal fetal specialist and her saying that day, like, you need to go into the hospital. Like, she just kept saying, it's just a matter of time before something happens. Like, what is the something? And it was like all of the things that, you know, when it becomes eclampsia, it's no longer pre-eclampsia, you know, she kind of went through those things. I was like, okay, going to the hospital. So going to the hospital, you know, the doctors who admitted me were optimistic and we're like, you know, we're gonna try to make it to 37 weeks. I was 29 weeks at the time. Like, we're trying to make it to 37 weeks, so like get comfortable, have someone bring your laptop, whatever you need to like, you know, be working. You know, you're gonna be mostly on bed rest, but like you're gonna be here, right? And then like if we don't make it to 37 weeks, hopefully at least 34 weeks, because there's something about like the lung development that's good at 34 weeks. And then, you know, they would come and they would monitor me and the baby, the nurses and doctors, every few hours, blood drawn every few hours. And then on the fifth day, they came in and they put the baby monitor on my stomach. They put my blood pressure cuff on and then kind of didn't come back for a little while. And then when they came back, they kind of checked the machine and then they left and kept everything on. And so finally, after a little while, I was like, okay, what's going on? Because you come and you take stuff off when you leave, and you're not taking the stuff off. And so they were like, we're just noticing something, and so we want to just monitor a little bit more closely. And I go, yeah. And then the next time they come back in, they're like, so we're noticing that your blood pressure remains really high, your son's heart rate keeps dipping, so we think it's time to go into labor and delivery. And I was like, excuse me? Like, I was supposed to be here to, you know, for like a month more than that. Like, we're 5 days in. And they were like, yeah, we know it's shocking, but like, he's telling us that he wants to come out, that he, you know, will do better on the outside. And I remember hearing that and being like my baby is rejecting my body. And that hurt a lot. If you know him now, now I'm not offended because I see why he wanted to be out. He just is who he is. But in that moment, it was just like, hey, so I'm about to have this baby. And so I was like, okay, so can I like take a shower? Can I call my husband? Can I call my doula? And the doctor was like, she was like, you could probably call your doula support person. You can have one person come into the room and they have to be all masked up and everything. And you could probably call your husband, but we're going to come back in about 30 minutes and take you to prep you. And I was like, what? 30 minutes? Okay. So I called my husband, I break down crying, and I was like, this is not anything that I expected. Like, I'm so nervous and I'm so like everything. And he's just, you know, from halfway across the world trying to calm me and, you know, pray for me and just, you know, like, you got to do this. And, you know, I'm also thinking about how he's feeling, not being able to be there to support. And so they take me into labor and delivery. Labor and delivery nurses were amazing. And my doula shows up, and that was like the greatest thing because I was like, I was really about to have to go through this literally alone. And all things considered, it was a relatively uneventful birth, right? I had to have a C-section, obviously, because he was so tiny. And that was another thing that I had to like really just kind of let go in the moment because when the doctor came in and told me that it was time to go, she said something about C-section, and I was like, wait, I can't have a vaginal birth. And she was like, no, like your baby essentially wouldn't survive it. And so it's like all these things just about like I had no control over. I had absolutely no control over. And I just had to be like, okay, this is what it is. This is what we're doing. Yeah, relatively uneventful. C-section was fine. We were able to take a couple pictures, and then he had to leave me. I didn't get to see him for 10 days. So you asked about postpartum. Like the postpartum experience was tough because there's like the physical recovery from the C-section, and then there's like the emotional recovery from not being able to be with him for 10 days because I had COVID, and then just processing all the other stuff, my husband not being there, and then me being in pain and learning I had lupus. And like, so I'd say postpartum was especially the immediate part of postpartum was really hard because I feel like there was just like pain in so many ways. And then I feel like the NICU experience is a part of my postpartum experience as well. And the NICU experience was, in a lot of ways, it was really good and it was really great. And it was nice that, like, okay, we knew he was likely gonna, he was coming early. And so I'm in a hospital that would have, the level of NICU that he would need being born that early. And so in that sense, it was good. I did have a couple of experiences with white nurses who I feel like were really insensitive to me, my experiences, and just wanted to go like by the book. And I was like, see, my son is not a book though. He is, first of all, every baby is a unique being, but I also need you to recognize that there are a lot of things that can be overlooked and misunderstood. Like just him being a black boy, me being a black woman, I was like, these are experiences that I've had in my own medical experience of being looked over a little bit. And so like I'm gonna need you to be a little bit more thoughtful. And so there was one nurse that I absolutely had to be like, shit, I don't want her anywhere near my son. Remove her from the team, not let her come back. And I feel like it's like sometimes when I tell that story, particularly to people in my family, they feel like I was overreacting. And I'm like, I would rather overreact than have a story. Like I know too many women who have lost their children, have had issues in the hospital before they even left the hospital because they were not listened to and they were not believed. So I'm like, I'm making all the racket, so what? Because we're not going to get to a point where it becomes really serious when you're not listening to me. So yeah, I was very, very proactive about like paying attention to like the fact that my son was a black boy. And like, I mean, we were in Seattle, so he was one of the only black babies in the NICU period. And we had one black nurse in, the 48 days that we were in the NICU. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna need y'all to see who he is and pay attention to him.
Thank you for sharing that. And it was, amazing to hear how you were able to advocate for yourself and for your baby, in those moments. I did want to go back a little bit to your experience in the hospital and around the time of your birth. Was there any preparation for you in terms of like what the pain management would be like? And I know it ended up being a C-section, but was it something that you knew about the options beforehand? Or were you kind of just learning in the moment?
I definitely was learning in the moment. There was so much that was happening in the moment. And I think about that a lot because I'm like, are there things that they could have done because things, kind of progressed quickly? And then I stop and I'm like, yeah, because I know I'm not the only woman who had, had to give birth preterm. Like there should be some kind of substance in place where you are sharing information, but also not overwhelming, the patients as they're going through this. The hospital that I gave birth at had this initiative, particularly around Black birthing experiences. They had a team of people um, of support around it. And so there were several people who came to my room who were like, we know that we kind of have this like reputation of not being responsive to Black mothers and Black families. And so there are these things in place and we're a part of that team. And so if you have any questions, ask us, right? I appreciate that, but at the same time, I think that program almost overwhelmed me a little bit more because it was just like people just coming at me giving me information. And I feel like they need to figure out a little bit more, how to have someone come and sit with you a little bit as opposed to like, I'm popping your room, give you this information. If you have any questions, reach out to us, and then bye, I'm gone. Because like in the state that I'm in, I'm like, I don't even know the questions that I have for you right now because I had this plan and that plan all of a sudden went out the window. And so like I don't know what questions to ask you right now. And so I feel like, the effort is there, but it wasn't necessarily effective or good enough. So I felt like stuff just kept coming at me and I didn't know what to ask. I feel like there's so much happening. There was so much happening that I did not know. And I'm trying to have grace with myself for not asking more questions because there was a lot going on in the moment. But man, if I had to do all over again, I would ask so many more questions to be more aware of like what they were doing to my body, essentially.
I totally agree with you on like giving yourself grace. It sounds like every step of this was unexpected and was challenging and was difficult. So it's important to recognize that you can't know everything in the moment. And hindsight 2020. I think continue to give yourself grace around those things. Everything was not what you had originally planned. How did you feel in terms of the postpartum like recovery process physically? What did that look like for you when it came to these also random, unexpected things that are now approaching you as a health problem, but also, physically and emotionally?
Yeah. I was thinking about this earlier today in preparation for this conversation about how I think like how people typically describe their recovery process without all of the other stuff. I was like, that was like the least. I think I thought about the least, like the pain from my C-section and the scarring and all that. I probably passed that the least, right? I mean, I did have pain, but in some ways, it just did not compare to the pain of lupus. It didn't compare to the emotional pain of being without my family, being without my husband, the first 10 days being without the baby, right? Like when I think back on that postpartum experience, like I think about the physical pain of, birth, probably the least. I feel like I think the part about like having my family there is something I'm still processing for myself. And probably someday I'm gonna have to have a conversation with my family. The things that I went through, like somebody should have hopped on a plane and just come. But that's something I'm still processing. I think that they showed up in the ways that they thought were okay. And like I said, the ways in which my community showed up were really helpful. I think that gave me the space to be able to process, the experience on my own and have a little bit of time to myself to be able to sit for a few minutes and be like, okay, this is what's happening. And my husband as well, because even though I was the one that was physically going through it, like he was going through it too, like having to be separate from everything that was happening and, wondering what's going on and wondering if I'm going to be okay and wondering if his son is going to be okay. I mean, yeah, I think I'm still processing it.
Can you tell us, since you've delivered, how do you feel like you've grown personally and emotionally since becoming a parent?
I feel like I was saying earlier, I've become really aware of like my emotional and just like state of being. I've always been pretty like I'm really sensitive and so aware of my emotions, but I feel like now I'm aware and more in control of them. I'm able to, really recognize when like a panic attack is about to come on. I'm really able to like I can just like really feel it in my body. And I feel like pregnancy and motherhood has really brought that about because I just had to really pay attention to myself in the moment and guard myself in order to protect my son, essentially. I definitely feel like anxiety does not control me as much as it does. I'm much more aware. It's because I don't want to place that onto my son. I'm very aware of that for my son, and I don't want certain energies to land on him. Not that I want to hide it from him, but like as a baby, when he's not aware of what's happening to him, I want, when he's older, I want to be able to talk to him about those things. But now, like, I don't want that to land on him in such a way that it affects him in a way that I know that it did affect me as a child. And so I'm mindful of it. And so that has changed me a lot in motherhood.
I feel like we've talked a lot about the different ways motherhood has like shaped your perspective and your newfound, I guess what you would say your newfound perspective of what life is. And it's so beautiful to hear that. I'm wondering, what would you say has been like your biggest barriers or just biggest challenges you've experienced through your parenting journey so far?
My son and I both travel back to the US every few months for our medical care. And so he ends up spending a lot more time with me at this point than he does with my husband. And so I want to be very aware and cautious that like my idea of parenting is not the only idea of parenting that is a part of his journey. There are certain things that I'm sure my husband and I agree on. He's not around, so I'm like, doing it that way. But then there are times I'm like, I don't know what my husband will think about this. Or like when we're here with him now and I see him, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that you would react and respond that way. And that's different from how I would do it. And so I think being conscious of that, all parents, couples have to think about that, but especially because we have to end up spending a lot of time apart. Like, how do we still parent together when we're not in the same place, or my husband is not in the same place as his son? And how do we keep him a part of the journey and a part of the process? I think has been a really, really a big challenge and important thing to think about. I mean, I feel like our journey is a bit unconventional, and so just having to like travel back and forth all the time is a challenge in and of itself. It is, I think, in a lot of ways great for my son because he gets to experience both cultures, like both of his parents' cultures. Like he's essentially growing up in both of them, which is a really cool thing. And he's getting to spend time with both sides of his family. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges, even though it's also a pretty cool experience for him. But I think it's also unsettling for both of us, for all of us, really.
You shared quite a bit about the challenges that you faced, both medically and emotionally. And parenthood is such a pivotal moment in people's lives where there's just such immense change. And then adding on to you that you travel quite a bit, you're navigating between these two places. So I'm curious to know, like, how has your perspective on life and especially your relationships, how have they shifted since you've, become a parent?
Asking for help. Like, there's no shame in asking for help. We actually recently put out a fundraiser to help us with all of the costs that are going back and forth between the US and Ghana. And several people have said to me, like, oh, like, that's so brave, or I'm so proud of you for you and your family for doing this. And I'm just like, I need my son to be okay. So we have to do this. I need me to be okay as well. Like, and navigating the disease that I have. I need to be okay so he can be okay. We need to be okay. And not being afraid to ask for help. And the way that people show up and are like, yeah, like we see your story. We want to help you has been amazing. And not feeling any sense of shame in that. And I just feel like at some point everybody needs help. There are times when, we are doing well and can be celebrated in the spotlight. And then there are times when people need help. And I would not hesitate. And so, like we've gotten financial support, we've gotten support with baby supplies, we've gotten support with, places to stay when we're in the US, because, like paying rent in two places in the world is too expensive. Like you can't be doing all that. And so just not being afraid to ask for help and saying, this is what I need, and not feeling like I'm failing as a parent, I'm failing as a mother because I can't do X, Y, and Z in this moment.
And I mean, we think about how so much of Black womanhood, Black motherhood is just a story of resilience, right? Both on the positive and the negative side of superwoman schema and protection, like you've mentioned a couple times in the interview. But like you said, it's also this topic of self-protection, self-preservation, and how does that look like for you as a person, as a mother, outside of, your child and your rest of your family. And so I love how you just, really pinpointed on asking for help and that no one to be afraid to do that. So I definitely want to just call it out for anyone listening. You're not alone. Help is out there, and you can find the support that you need, and we can also help find resources for you.
Raedell, I want to just thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for being so vulnerable about everything that you went through, and then also for just like these lessons that you've learned and those perspectives and then sharing it with us. I think our listeners are really going to benefit from that. Especially the thing that like really landed with me was not just knowing what you need, but then not being afraid to ask for help. Because I think that that's oftentimes the biggest barrier, and a lot of people are suffering in silence.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners as we conclude?
Yeah, I think I just want to name that even if I haven't named it throughout this conversation, that like navigating all these things as a Black woman has been significant to me. So like understanding and appreciating all the statistics that surround the things around birthing, that surround things about lupus, that surround things about systems, that surround things about asking for help, like coming at that all from a perspective of being a Black woman, like I understand what that means. And so especially to Black women who, you know, need the help, who don't understand the systems, you know, an illness that might pop up and you don't know how to navigate it, like just ask all the questions, get all the help that you can and that you need. Yes, we are often seen as and have to show up as superwoman, and we nurture and we take care of everyone else, and we are called resilient. But if you allow yourself to rest and have peace in the midst of all of those challenges, I think that we can find that people will also show up for us. And often, I mean, it was other Black women that showed up for me. Like, those are some of the most important people that are a part of my community. And so I also encourage us as Black women, when we see another sister in need, like, don't hesitate to reach out. Know that she is like trying to carry the load and be strong, and like let her know that for a moment she doesn't have to be strong because you got her. And I think that that could be a huge part of our just growing and healing process as Black women.
Thank you again so much for being here with us. I think, you know, another thing that you just mentioned that I think really resonated is that vulnerability is one superpower, because that's when people can show up for you. And so I just want to thank you for being vulnerable with us, and for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to her story. We hope that these stories inspire, uplift, and remind you that you're never alone on this path.
Tune in on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and join the conversation.
We would love to hear your thoughts, your stories, and you can connect with us on social media.
Together, we're building a community, one voice at a time.